Hey, how's it going, folks? Dirk here. It is time to give you an NCAA update. That's right, folks. We are now in the round. We're now in the Sweet 16. That's right, the Sweet 16. We are just 2 rounds. This round, then next, to the Final Four. Can you believe it? But you gotta know how we got here, where we're at now. Well, we started with the first four, which was last Tuesday, or 2 weeks ago, actually. First game was University, Maryland, Baltimore County taking on Howard University. And in that game, Howard beat University, Maryland, Baltimore County 86-30, 86-83. And that team, Howard will take on Michigan in the round of 64. In the other game, Miami, Ohio took on Southern Methodist University in the first four game 2 weeks ago on a Tuesday. And Miami, Ohio beats Southern Methodist University 89-79. So, and that winner went on to take on, where's that game? Oh yeah, Will took on Tennessee at the 6-11 matchup in the Midwest. Now, the other two games were Prairie View versus Lehigh. And that one, Prairie View beats Lehigh 67-55. Now, this was 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday. And that means Prairie View will take on one-seeded Florida in the South. And finally, Texas takes on North Carolina State. And this game went down to the wire also, and Texas wins by a score of 68-66 and took on 6 BYU. So now the round 64 is set. And we start off in the East bracket with Duke versus Siena. Now this game was pretty good, and Siena was dominating in the first half, going to scare Duke, and for the second time ever, a 1 seed will beat a 16 seed. Guess what? That did not happen. Duke overpowered and won, took over in the second half, and really dominated, winning by a score of 71-65. Then we had the 8-9 matchup between Ohio State and TCU. Now, this game, which is Texas Christian University, this game was pretty good and dominant, but Ohio State pulls off the upset. Sorry, not the Ohio State loses in an upset to TCU 66-64. Pretty good matchup, though. Also, the 5-12 matchup, St. John's versus Northern Iowa, another very good 5-12 versus matchup, and St. John's beats Northern Iowa 79-53. Then we had Kansas against California Baptist University, and Kansas beats Cal Baptist, score of 69-60. Next was Louisville taking on South Florida. This was a great 6-11 matchup, and Louisville beats South Florida 83-79. 3-14 matchup took on Michigan State versus North Dakota State. That's right, the battle of the state universities. Pretty good matchup, but Michigan State dominated the game and wins by a score of 92-67. Next, it was UCLA versus University of Central Florida. This game was neck and neck, back and forth, and eventually UCLA beats University of Central Florida 75-71. Next, in the East, was UConn taking on Furman. UConn was behind late in the first half, but came back to win it in the second half by a score of 82-71. So in the East bracket going into the round 2, it was Duke versus TCU, Texas Christian University. Duke come out firing, not like how they did against Siena, and Duke wins by a score of 81-58. St. John taking on Kansas. Kansas came out firing, so did St. John, but at the end, it was a buzzer beater by Kansas to win it 67-65, an upset for Kansas by beating St. John. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. St. John beats Kansas, upsetting Kansas. Great 5 versus 4 matchup, legendary 5 versus 4 matchup. St. John's at the buzzer wins it 67-65. St. John's move on to the Sweet 16. And it was Louisville versus Michigan State. Very good matchup here. And late in the game, Michigan State was trailing. They did great, and they win by the score of 77-69. And finally, UConn versus UCLA. UCLA was doing pretty good, trying to hold off UConn. UConn prevails by a score of 73-55. So now we're in the Sweet 16, and this is the matchup in the Sweet 16 in the Eastern bracket. Duke will take on St. John. Michigan State will take on UConn. Now let's get into the South bracket, South region. It was Florida taking on Prairie View. Florida dominated the whole game, no doubt about it. It wins by a score of 114-55. Crimson versus Iowa. Another great 8 versus 9 matchup. This game was going back and forth. Crimson had the first half lead, but Iowa comes back out of nowhere, dominates in the last few minutes of the game by having Crimson fouling, and that's how they won by the score of 67-61, pulling off the upset over Clemson. Vanderbilt taking on McNeese. This game was pretty good. Also, McNeese did have an early lead at one point, but Vanderbilt came back and done it and wins by a score of 78-68. Next was Nebraska versus Troy, and Nebraska led all the way through, not letting up, and wins by a score of 76-47. Next was VCU taking on North Carolina, and the Tar Heels were looking good. They dominated, but they let VCU come back, get this game into overtime, and in overtime, VCU just was too much, and they win. They pull off the upset by a score of 82-78. Next, it was the Illini taking on Penn. The Illini dominated the whole game and did a great job and wins by a score of 105-70. Next, St. Mary's taking on Texas A&M University, and this was all Texas A&M all the way through. No stopping, and Texas A&M pulls off an upset over St. Mary's, the 10 versus the 7 seed. 10 seed wins by a score of 63-50. And finally, Houston versus Idaho. Houston never let up. They led all the way through and won by a score of 78-47. Now in the round 2 matchup, Iowa takes on Florida. And Florida had the early lead going into the second half, but Iowa just put the pressure on Florida, and they beat them in a buzzer beater fashion with a score of 73-72, and eliminating a 1 seed, and basically the lowest 1 seed in the tournament. So the 9th seed moves on to the Sweet 16. Next was Vanderbilt versus Nebraska. This was another nail biter. Vanderbilt had the lead going into the second half, and Nebraska pushed, and they won. And in once again in buzzer beater fashion, Nebraska pulls it off by a score of 74-72, moving on to their first ever Sweet 16. Next was VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University taking on the Illini. This game was all Illini, no doubt about it. The Illini wins 76 55. And finally, Texas A&M versus Houston, the Battle of Texas. And this game was Houston all the way through. No let up. Houston wins by the score of 88-55. So in the Sweet 16, here's who we got going on. We got Iowa and Nebraska taking on Illinois and Houston. These games are played in Houston. That's right. Houston, Texas is the site of this year's South Regional. If I look at the bracket, okay. And Houston is basically playing a home game. They're only 2 miles away from their campus. It's going to look very good. I mean, this game is going to be huge. They're playing at the Toyota Center. So, meanwhile, Iowa and Nebraska, they're going to be playing also at the Toyota Center. So, Duke and St. John, they're playing at Capital One Arena. They're in D.C. Meanwhile, the West region, they're playing at the SAP Center in San Jose. And the Midwest, are playing at the United Center in Chicago. Okay, so now let's get into the West region. That's right, the West region. These games. Okay, sorry about that. I had a video done. All right, these games are in the West region. Starting off with Arizona versus Long Island University, which is in New York. This was total dominance by the Arizona Wildcats, and they win by the score of 92-58. Next was Villanova, the Wildcats, taking on Utah State in a very good 8-9 matchup. And this game was going back and forth, back and forth. Villanova had the early lead going into the second half, but loses it to Utah State by a score of 86-76. And another 9 seed upsets an 8 seed. Can they go 4 for 4? We'll find out. Next was High Point, which was in North Carolina, taking on Wisconsin. This game was very good. Wisconsin had the early lead, and High Point just took it from there, and they win in a stunning upset fashion, buzzer beater upset fashion, by a score of 83-82, which is the biggest upset of this tournament. 12 versus a 5 and 12 seed wins. Next was Arkansas versus Hawaii. Great matchup. This was Arkansas from the start, and Hawaii was pushing. They couldn't do enough, and they win by the score of 97-78. Next was BYU taking on Texas in a 6 versus 11 matchup. This one was Texas all the way through, but BYU tried to push back but couldn't do it, and Texas upsets BYU Brigham Young University by a score of 79-71. Then we had Gonzaga versus Kennesaw State. This game was Gonzaga all the way. Literally, it was Gonzaga. Actually, Gonzaga was trailing by much in half, and Gonzaga pulled it off in the second half by winning by a score of 73-64. Next, Miami University taking on Mizzou. That's right, Mizzou. And this was Miami all the way through. Mizzou didn't really have a chance, and they lose to, the 7th seed beats the 10th seed 80-66. And finally, Purdue versus Queens. This game was Purdue all the way, non-stop Purdue, and Purdue wins by a score of 104-71. Now in the second round, Arizona versus Utah State. This was Arizona once again dominating the whole game, and they beat Utah State by the score of 78-66. High Point versus Arkansas. Arkansas led the whole game, and they beat High Point by the score of 94-88. Next, Texas takes on Gonzaga, the 11 versus 3 seed. Winner goes to the Sweet 16. And this was total dominate. And believe it or not, Texas had a brief lead in the first half. And then Gonzaga tried to battle their way back and almost did it, but lose by 6, 74-68. Now Texas is the biggest upset going into this round of Sweet 16 with beating Gonzaga. That's right, the 11 seed upsets the 30 seed. Next was Miami taking on Purdue. This was a very close game at the half with Miami leading, and Miami kept the lead and did it, and they won by the score of 79-69. So now in the West bracket, going to San Jose, here's who we have. It's Arizona versus Arkansas, Texas versus Purdue. That's right, Texas versus Purdue. Now in the Midwest bracket, the Chicago region. What happened? Here we go. Michigan takes on Howard. This was Michigan 100% all the way. Howard didn't stand a chance, and Michigan wins by a score of 101-80. Next was the St. Louis Billikens taking on the University of Georgia. It was the Billikens taking on the Bulldogs. And this was SLU 100% all the way, beating Georgia by a score of 102-77 and upsetting Georgia in all 9 seeds for the first time in the since 2019, I believe they said. All 4 9 seeds beats the 8th seed, upsets the 8th seed. So that's pretty good. Next was Texas Tech taking on Akron. This was Texas Tech all the way, non-stop, and they beat Akron by the score of 91-71. And next was Alabama versus Hofstra. Hofstra University really didn't stand a chance. They were down after the end of the first half, and because it was all Alabama, and Alabama wins 90-70. Tennessee taking on Miami of Ohio, and this was another dominant performance by the higher seed, as Tennessee just took over in the first half, then let up in the second half, and wins by a score of 78-56. Next, Virginia taking on Wright State, and Wright State, they didn't have the muster. They couldn't do it. Another dominant performance by the higher seed, 3 versus 14, and Virginia outright wins 82-73. And next was Kentucky taking on Santa Clara. This game was down to the wire. Now these teams were playing in St. Louis, by the way. I want you to know. Okay, these teams were literally playing in St. Louis. Yeah. Same thing with Miami and Mizzou and Purdue versus Queens. They were in St. Louis also. This game was back and forth. Kentucky led the first half. Santa Clara comes back, ties it. This game had to go to overtime, and in true form, this game was won in overtime by Kentucky 89-49. I mean 89-84. This game was basically won at the free throw line. And finally, Iowa State at Tennessee, taking on Tennessee State, 2 versus 15. This was total dominance by Iowa State, going strong in the first half, not letting up, and that's why Iowa State beats Tennessee State by the score of 108-74. Now here we go with this round 2. Who goes where? Who now goes into the Sweet 16? Well, here we go. Michigan takes on Salute, and Michigan just couldn't let up. They dominated the Billikens all the way through, and the Billikens lose to Michigan 95-72, and the Billikens run is over. But they had a great run, almost winning the, losing in the A10 tournament, but got the at-large bid, so way to go. Next was Texas Tech at Alabama, not Texas Tech, the classic 4 versus 5 matchup, Alabama versus Texas Tech. Very good matchup, and it was Alabama all the way through. Texas Tech could not break Alabama, and Alabama wins by a score of 90-65. Next was Tennessee taking on Virginia. The 3-6 classic 3-6 matchup that everyone wants. Who will win this one? And went very down to the wire, but Tennessee, Virginia had a slight lead going into the second half, and Tennessee did good, and that's why they're now moving on to the Sweet 16. That's why they move on to the Sweet 16 for the score. They beat Virginia 79-72. And finally, Kentucky taking on Iowa State, and this one was a nail biter. Just for a while, Kentucky had a slight lead going into the second half, and they didn't really let up. That's why Kentucky beat Iowa State by a score of 82-63. So here we go, the final 4 teams going into the Sweet 16. We have Michigan will take on Alabama. Tennessee takes on Iowa State. So that's where we're at now. So what are tonight's games, and where can you watch them? So here we go. Let's go to it. I'll tell you. Tonight we have Texas. The 11th seed Texas will take on Purdue at the SAP Center in San Jose. This game is at 6:10 Central Time. That's 7:10 Eastern on CBS. You can watch this game on CBS. Texas is an 8. It's a plus 8.5, plus 8.5. Unless I take the favorites, probably. And the over/under is 147.5 points. So you decide you want to go over, you want to go under on that. On TBS at 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern, it is the 9th seed Iowa taking on Nebraska. That's right, Iowa and Nebraska at Houston, Texas, at the Toyota Center. This is going to be a great matchup. Iowa is a plus 1.5, and the over/under is 132.5. Next, it's Arkansas. Now, the next game after that is Arkansas at Arizona. That's right, Arkansas at Arizona. This game will be played at the SAP Center in San Jose. So we got the West tonight, and we got the South tonight. That means East and Midwest are tomorrow. And Arkansas is a plus 8.5. Over/under on this one, you decide you want to go over or under. The total points over or under is 164.5. And finally, by the way, that's uh, Texas and Purdue and Arkansas and Arizona are on CBS tonight, while Iowa and Nebraska and Illini and Houston are on TBS. And finally, the Illini, the 3 seed, the Illini takes on the number 2 seed Houston. Classic 2 versus 3 matchup. The matchup we want to see. That's right, this is a matchup that we all want to see because this is where the 3-2 will meet up. So, this is a classic matchup. And the Illini are plus 2.5. Over under on this game is 139.5. And you pretty much know who I'm going for, and I'll tell you. I'll grab my bracket. Got friends. I'll grab my bracket. Here's who I'm going for in tonight's games. Well, I lost the Florida game, so I automatically lost that one. But I'm going for the Illini tonight, and I'm going, and I already lost the, no, I did not. And I'm going for Arizona tonight. So it's Arizona and the Illini tonight for me. And tomorrow I'll tell you who I'm going for in tomorrow's games. So, yeah. So, how's your bracket, by the way? Is your bracket busted? If it is, comment below. Literally, tell me below. Is your bracket busted? I'd like to know. Really, I'd like to know. Is your bracket busted? Or is your team still in? Tell me below and tell me how you guys are doing. Okay? For me, by the way, we're not up into that. I got 36 so far, and I'm tied for 4th in my own little bracket buster. So that's it. And I'll see you guys later tonight as we will have a post-game report on this as we get ready for the Elite Eight. That's right. 4 teams will make the Elite Eight tonight. Or should we say 2 teams will make the Elite Eight tonight? Yeah, actually 4 teams will make the Elite Eight. 4 more. And then, folks, we were at the Final 4 after this weekend. It's crazy. It's March Madness, folks. So thank you very much for tuning in. This has been a college basketball update. Thank you very much. And once again, comment below. Tell me what you guys think. Is your guys' bracket busted? Or you didn't do a bracket this year? You guys could tell me and tell me who you guys got to win it all. For me, I got Duke, but you never know. Thank you very much for tuning in, folks. I love you guys. I'll see you later tonight for basically the NHL pregame report or postgame report and tonight's postgame report here on the men's tournament. Till then, peace.